And we're live. That, folks, is the sound of a rubber chicken. And we are Chicken Foot Podcast. My name is Judah Buddha. That's the name I go by, at least, when I'm talking comedy. And I'm here with Arthur Spooner. That's the name he goes by. Like, that's your gamer name for everything, right?
Yeah. 32 Skidoo.
What?
All right. So,
well, before we
get started, let me. I thought of a funny story.
Wait, before the story, I just want to talk to everybody. I want to mention a little disclaimer. I know everybody's mind is on the COVID, but we choose not to talk about that in this podcast. We have other podcasts that we talk about that, but this one we want to keep it COVID clear. And we have a couple of health professionals, and we, especially Joseph, and we don't really want to get into all that. So we're just going to keep it COVID clear here, and hope you can join us in that. Otherwise, let's get into the hilarity. Right. And by hilarity, I mean, moderately funny.
Yeah. Well, this first story, because we usually open with a joke, but I don't have a joke. I have a humorous story, and I think humorous is probably a better way to describe it. Because it's not hilarious. So, so when I was a kid, we were stationed in Arizona, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, right? It's an Army base. And I was probably like in middle school. And so I don't know if you ever, I took you on a Navy base before.
Yeah.
So I don't know if most people probably don't know what a military base looks like. The housing's all the same. Mm-hmm. It's really nice. I mean, obviously the security is going to be a little bit better. You know what I mean?
And it's sprawled out, though. It's sprawled out.
Yeah, it's sprawled out. And to get on and off, you have to have either a military ID or you're directly with a person who has a military ID. Okay, and the whole thing is fenced off. There's no like going through the jungle or woods and jump over. Okay. It's all fence off, barbed wire, all that kind of stuff. Okay. That being said, I was a kid and we were stationed in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and it must have been like 2:00 in the morning, and there's like a pounding at the door, right?
Okay.
And I wake up and my window faces the front door. So it doesn't face the front door. It's on the same side as the front door. And I can kind of peek out and see like the edge of the person.
Yeah.
And so my dad goes to the door and I hear some talking and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I was at the time I didn't know. So later I found out what happened was this guy showed up to our door and he's been knocking on all these doors around the neighborhood completely naked. He's completely naked. And he's knocking on all these doors, and so he's holding his stuff, and he's asked my dad. He's like, "Excuse me, sir, can is it possible you can lend me some clothes and drive me off base?" Drive me off base, and my dad's like, "All right." So he gets the guy some clothes, and he drives on because the guy couldn't walk off base. You know what I mean? He's naked, right? They were. And because he has no ID, I don't know where he would keep the ID, but he doesn't. So to get off base, you don't need an ID to get off. They only card people getting on.
Yeah.
So my dad tells me later on, I found out what happened was he was at some lady's house who her significant other was not supposed to be home.
Oh, no.
So that person gets home and he quickly scrambles and just jumps out the window, leaves all his belongings, his ID, his clothes, everything. And he's just roaming around neighborhoods hoping somebody will take him off base because he's not an active duty military. So I just remember as a kid being like, who's knocking? And my dad kind of catering the story enough to.
How did he tell you?
Well, he said some naked guy wanted to ride off base. And I was like, why would a naked guy want to ride off base? I don't understand that. And my dad just left it at that. So years later, when the story came back to my mind, and somebody like refreshed, either somebody was talking about it or it came. I was like, oh. As a kid, I was like, man, this guy was taking a nap and he just wasn't ready. Boogeyman comes in and he's out of there. I mean, if you were caught in a fire and your pants are down, what would you do? You would walk out with your pants on. Yeah. Yeah. Well, some other kind of fire is being put out.
Oh man, I can't imagine. You know, I used to go on the base all the time. Oh, I've got a funny story to back that up.
Okay.
So I used to I had a couple girlfriends. I lived in North Carolina, near Havelock, North Carolina, which is there's Cherry Point base there.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to school in Havelock, North Carolina, and so I went to school with a lot of people that lived on base, and I dated two girls that went there, so I was on base a lot, not at the same time, but
you weren't on base the same time, or you were the girls at the same time?
I didn't date them both at the same time.
Okay.
But so so they both had, their dads were high up in the military. I think it was in the Marines.
Oh, okay.
And so we would hang out. But my brother, I don't know if you know my brother, but he's always been sort of eccentric, and he's always been kind of this, even as a little kid, he was like this little libertarian guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went to school at this one place, and they had signs that said no firearms here. Okay. And it really pissed him off, and he pulled them all down. And he didn't know where to put them.
Military base.
No, this was in the city. This is is in Morehead City. So he at school, but he didn't know what to do with them. He didn't want to get in trouble, so he found a place for them. Anyways, smash cut to me. I'm about to leave the base. Random car check. You know, like, and I'm just like, oh, okay, go ahead. I'm like, go ahead. I got nothing in there, you know, and I'm this young,
you got nothing on me, copper.
Young punk 16-year-old, and they open up my trunk. There was some like more weird stuff. I can't remember there was some weird stuff in there. And they're like, what's this? I'm like, oh, come on. It's nothing, man. Let me through. I got to go. You know, I was late and my parents, you know, and they pull up the carpet. Underneath the carpet are all these signs that say no firearms allowed. And on the sign, it says penalty, like illegal to do, you know, penalty by incarceration if you remove this sign. And I'm just like, I don't know where this came from. And I got in so much trouble.
Oh man!
But just with them, like they brought me into it. They asked me where you came from. I was like, I don't know. Like, this is a family car. You know, before I was like, this is my car. I know what's in this car. You know, but like by the time they had me in the office, I'm just like, yes, officer, it's a family car. You know, it's just totally 180. And they finally let me go, but they kept the signs. I was so ticked at my brother.
When I'm hearing that story, in my mind, I'm picturing you having to walk around and like, they're like, what's this? And you're just like, wait a minute. Oh my God. What is this?
Because I didn't even know my brother was doing such things, you know? And like, I had no idea. But it looked, you know, those signs, they look so scary. Yeah. I'm just like, my mind's racing. Like, whoa, where did those come from? Like, is this part of a bigger plot? Yeah. You know, did they plant those on me?
Oh, man. Well, that kind of shocked face reminds me of when I was in Guam, you know, and I was stationed there. I was in my khaki uniform. Yeah. And so I don't know if you know what that one looks like. It's got all the ribbons on there and the tag. It's like really fine pressed, you know, military lines. And the rank and everything like that. It looks really
it's almost
nice.
like your dress up clothes.
Right? Yeah, a little bit. Like in between, it's almost like if you were wearing khakis and a button down shirt. That would be the equivalent of it.
Okay.
And I have a power or a pre-workout drink. It's like fruit punch kind of thing, and it's in one of those shakers, right?
Yeah.
And so I have it in there, and I forgot to clip the top. So I go, and it just all over me, and I just remember going, what? Like, I was like, oh my, what is going on? I can't believe this. Like all over my uniform. It was just like I was spraying it on my face because I really, because you got to shake it. And I really shook it. And it was like, and I was just like, what just happened? And I was like, oh my God.
Because you have to keep those like super clean.
Yeah.
Right?
You got to dry clean them and stuff and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't have a spare there. I was like, oh my God. Fortunately for me, I had a spare of my blueberries, the blue camouflage that they used to have in my office. And I just changed clothes. And I was like, I just couldn't believe it. I was just so shocked. It was like, what happened?
Like at first you think like, who's doing this to me?
Like what the? All right.
Your past self pranked you.
Yeah, totally.
Oh man. Well, that's hey, 3 for 1. We get three great stories.
Yeah, I got one for later on, but that's the end, our typical end story.
All right. Well, so that marks our time of telling some funny stuff at the beginning. Now, that brings up the thing that I was going to ask you about, because whether or not we tell jokes or stories, so wait, Daniel Heiniger, he says, I don't know what that image is. Show us the image. Howdy ho, Daniel. Thanks for showing up. Dan, do you know Dan? Dan's amazing guy. Thank you for checking in, man. One of the coolest guys. Anyway, okay. So what was I saying? Oh, so what makes a comedian? I'll put up our little banner here. What makes a comedian? Because the other day I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about, I think it was Will Ferrell, and what you can get away with, because there's this thing like you can get away with more as a comedian. Yeah. And the guest was not a comedian. He was like something else, and he was saying, well, Will Ferrell can get away with it because he's a comedian. And Joe Rogan stopped him in his tracks, like, whoa. I don't think Will Ferrell's a comedian. Does he do stand-up? And the guy said, oh, is that what qualifies you to be a comedian? Like you have to do stand-up to be a comedian? And he said, in our circles, you have to do stand-up in order to be considered a comedian. You have to do stand-up. And that kind of shocked me. I had never heard that before. Have you ever heard that?
I think I know the podcast because I watch Joe Rogan podcast too. And I think I know that one, and that kind of stood out to me too, because initially when you think comedian, if you were to come up with a definition of comedian and write it for, the dictionary, you'd probably say something like a person who does comedy.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, let me look it up.
Okay.
I just have to spell it right. So comedian is an entertainer whose act is designed to make an audience laugh.
Okay.
Or the second one is a comic actor, and the third one is an amusing, entertaining person. None of those include stand-up.
Right. Well, the first one, the act, I think that might be it. And second, a dictionary is just telling you how people use the word. That doesn't tell you what, So, but I think of it like, so Will Ferrell, he does movies and he's a comedic actor. If we're going to try to use that distinction, like Joe Rogan is doing, I think what Joe Rogan is saying, and it's almost like saying a hunter, like boiling down an aspect of a profession or a hobby or something just to one aspect. So like saying a hunter is just a gun shooter or a doctor is just a prescription writer, right?
Right.
Where being funny, making someone laugh is a result of what a comedian can do. But there's a lot of people who aren't comedians and they can make somebody laugh, right? Right. Animals can make people laugh and they're not doing it on purpose.
Right.
And so after he said that, I think what he was really saying is that what makes a comedian, and part of that's what stand-up is you have to write it, right, perform it, and it's just you out there. So there's no one who's gonna back you up. I mean, you got people who warm up the crowd or something like that, but you're just out there on your own. You write it, you perform it. You're the act. You're everything. So you're beginning to end. You do it all.
Well, the word that you just used really, I think, helped me understand it. Kind of what you're saying. You do it all. Profession. It's a particular profession, and Will Ferrell's profession is not comedian. Mm-hmm. It's actor.
Yeah.
But he was on. So, but that to me, what that makes me think of is Saturday Night Live. Are they actors or comedians? Because many of them do stand up, but not all of them. I mean, Will Ferrell got to start on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
So,
and there's a lot of comedians who are writers on Saturday Night Live. Mm-hmm. Like, Conan was a writer for Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
He is a late night talk show host. He does comedy.
And he does stand up too.
Does he? I haven't seen a stand up.
Well, his monologue at the beginning is stand up.
His monologue is, but I don't think he writes it all. He has writers who do some of that. So I don't know how he would consider himself.
Right. Right. And I guess you'd say, no, he's not a comedian. He's a late night show. What do you call it? Host. Late night show host.
Talk show host.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe going the other direction.
Mm-hmm. Playing devil's advocate, if you will.
Devil's advocate. And I wonder if maybe Joe Rogan, because he loves the craft so much, that it's almost kind of a sense of, pride. That
almost like Mama Bear kind of protecting his.
Yeah. So, he knows what it takes to do stand up, and just acting is because he's done acting too. Yeah. He was on, I don't remember what he was on, but Spin City or something like that years and years ago.
Spin City. Yeah.
And so he's done that comedy acting, and he's done
News Radio. I think.
Yeah, News Radio. So I wonder if it's more kind of, I don't want to say hubris, but a little bit of a pride of saying, what Will Ferrell is doing is funny, but that's nowhere near the level of work it takes to be a comedian, because someone else wrote the script and then you're just doing your impression of what you think that translates to.
That's fascinating to me. Yeah. That writing, and because we have realized doing this and trying to write jokes ourselves, how much effort and timing and just thought and sweat goes into crafting a joke, writing a joke, the writing of it.
And he has the comedy timing, right?
Will Ferrell.
So Will Ferrell being comedic actor, I think he picks up some of the skills that a stand-up comedian has, and he could be one. I mean, if you think about it, Ricky Gervais, that's how he became a stand-up comedian. He first was a writer. Well, first he was a musician.
Really?
Yeah, he played music.
Oh, musician. Oh, okay.
Musician. Okay. He's a musician who
did magic with tubas.
He's like Bunny in the Hat. Yay! And so first he had a band, then he did acting and writing.
Okay.
Because I think he was in a band like in his 20s, and if you Google him, in his band when he was in his 20s. He is really skinny. You could see his face, but the rest of him, you're like, no, because he was in the 80s.
Okay.
It was like the 80s with the hair. Like, and then he started doing acting and writing, and that he did The Office.
Well,
and then he said, you know what? I could do this. I could do stand-up. And so he started writing a stand-up, and then he started doing stand-up, and then he said he
didn't do stand-up till after The Office.
So he translated into it later after he had been successful on the other stuff.
Interesting.
So I can see how somebody could go that way, but it tends to go the other way. When someone has the skills to be able to write and perform, then they're getting pulled off and saying, you know what, perform on this show. Or write for us on this show, or you know what I mean.
But when you talk about that, not hubris, but sort of that protection, so two things come to my mind, and that is that Joe Rogan does not strike me. If I didn't know he was a comedian, I would never in a million years guess that he was a comedian. And the other thing is, following him and following sort of his podcasts and his friends, you realize how cliquey and close knit the comedian community is. It's interesting. They all know each other. They all kind of have each other's back. Like recently when, what's that guy's name? Ari Fleischer he said something about Kobe.
Oh, okay.
He said he was like denigrating Kobe right after Kobe died. It was, it resonated throughout the whole group. Each one of them had to talk about it. So I'm talking about Tom Segura, all these guys. Who's the other guy? Bert something, what's his name?
Yeah.
The big guy, he does it with the shirt off.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And who's the guy with the mohawk? And not mohawk, the mullet?
I don't remember. I don't know all their names, but all of them have podcasts.
Yeah, they all have podcasts, and they all had to talk about. Recently, I saw who's the tall guy that did the Eminem song. I can't remember his name. He's a funny guy.
I don't think I know that one.
You don't know? He was on. He's the one who mimicked Eminem. He did this like video, and he's like, napkins, pampkins.
No, I don't know.
And Eminem, and then Eminem put him on. Eminem put him on his recent video.
Oh no, I haven't seen that. I don't know who that is. But anyways, the point is, it's a click. I think part of what makes that click, and here's the other aspect. I think it makes the pride is that you got to earn your stripes.
Yeah. Part
of doing stand-up comedy is that they're touring, they're going to these hotels, they're away from family, and they're doing these small little clubs, refining their act. Working on new material, fielding it, refining it, throwing out old stuff, writing new stuff, trying to craft it all. And I think just somebody being in a funny movie is like saying, to a hunter, you're just a gun shooter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're just boiling down and you're missing all the stuff. And the click thing reminded me of Jeff Foxworthy.
Oh, yeah.
Because he worked at IBM in Atlanta. And he was just funny. He's a funny guy.
Oh, the Bert guy. Dan says it's Bert.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, because he does it without the shirt because he's got like a big belly.
I want to come back to that. But finish that thought. The whole redneck.
Yeah. So in the 90s, Jeff Foxworthy, he's known for his "You might be a redneck if." Whatever. I don't remember all of them. He had like a gazillion of them. And he worked at IBM in Atlanta, and he would do open mic in Atlanta, and they would tell him, say, look, anytime you want to come on, you come on. And he would just do it. And people were interested in him, and he started getting really good. But his wife told him and said, look, if you want to do this as a career, there's no way you're going to get big in Atlanta. You got to go to LA. So he goes to LA, he starts doing the Comedy Factory, and within that first year, he has his first album released, and at the time, it was the biggest comedy selling album, and he instantly was huge. And there was a lot of comedians who were upset because they've been pounding the pavement for 5-10 years trying to get big, and less than a year, this guy's making tons of money, and he's already like selling out theaters and stuff like that. And so there is a sense of like
territorialism,
territory, you didn't earn your stripes, jealousy. I hear a lot of comedians talk about sometimes comedians are jealous of other comedians when they make it big, and you're like, I've been doing this longer, or they're not as funny as I am, or whatever. So, but I think that goes back to what you were saying about kind of a cliquey that kind of feeds into this territorial idea of a comedian.
Well, it's interesting now because they are paving. So Joe Rogan he is the trailblazer, but comedians are paving the way for podcasting. Like, they are dominating the field of podcasting. Mm-hmm. Chris D'Elia was the guy I was trying to think of. You know Chris D'Elia? Mm-mm. You don't know Chris D'Elia?
No.
Okay, I'll have to introduce him. I don't actually find him that funny, but it's like his podcast and his commentary and stuff like that I find more funny. But so Dan Heiniger also says, have you seen the latest Tom Segura Netflix special?
Oh, Ball Hog?
I've seen
the advertisements for it. It's called Ball Hog.
Ball Hog, huh?
Yeah. And so far the little clip that I had seen of it is he's talking about, he's like, I'm not saying that animal love isn't real, but it's not like the same as like loving your kid. He's like, I can't remember what he said. Something about, he's like, if my dog bites my kid, I'll kill it right there. I'll kill it right there and give it to my kid. I wouldn't, that dog would be dead by the end of the day. He's like, I would never do that to my kid.
If my kid bites my dog.
That's the difference.
That's so good. That sounds really good. So Dan, have you seen it? And what is your take on it? I do want to start looking at comedians and sort of giving people, applying our quadrilateral to their act and seeing like, what are they doing right? What are they doing wrong?
Okay.
So maybe we should start with Bert, or not. Who is it? Tom Segura. Yeah.
Okay.
He has a podcast. I know him from Joe Rogan, but also from his own podcast. He does like a podcast with his wife.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Like, they're very, the thing I like
Your
about
Mom's
that
House. That's what it's called.
It's called Your Mom's. They're very not, so they're not politically correct.
Right.
They push the back, and that whole group of guys, Tom, Bert, Joe, and the other one, who's the bald guy, the redhead from Boston?
He just had his recent one special.
Yeah.
I can't remember. He was in The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I know.
He's in. I can't remember his name. But he's.
I'm not good at names. So
yeah.
It's gonna be a problem.
But anyways, that's part of the thing now. I think is stand-up comedians really.
Bill Burr.
Bill Burr. They really pride themselves on maintaining that free speech line. And part of being edgy with their comedy is to say, you know what, this is just part of what makes us great as Americans. But moving back,
just before you hold that thought, Dan said, he saw it last night, the Netflix special. I love all his other shows. This latest was him talking about himself, and I felt it was lazy and he wasn't up to the standards of his other shows. Interesting. It was just more him kind of just talking about himself, and he didn't. So and that's the thing that I've noticed is that it takes a lot of work. I mean, I'm going to come back to this over and over again. It takes a lot of work to write jokes.
Yeah. And
a lot of what Bill Burr does is just kind of, he takes his own experience and apparently Tom Segura, they've taken their own experiences and just kind of telling stories. But what were you saying?
Well, I was kind of thinking, you remember Hootie and the Blowfish?
Mm-hmm.
They came out, they had that album, and they were huge.
Yeah.
Right? And then they came out with another album, and people were like, meh, right?
Yeah.
But I heard an explanation of why that happens to bands. Is that they'll be out and they'll be writing songs for decades, and then when somebody catches them, they get all their best songs and they put it on an album. Mm-hmm. And then they did, that's 20 years of songs, of their best songs, and now in a year or 2 years they got to write all great songs like that again.
Right. They got to live up to 10 years of preparation.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's the same with comedians. And a lot of comedians, that's what they'll do. Even Ray Romano is going back out to doing stand-up in the small clubs because he's testing the material. He's working material. And so it's almost like he's got material, but it's not special level material to where he can do a special, right. And so I think Bill Burr does that. And, like at the Comedy Factory or the Laugh Factory or the Comedy Store or whatever it's called, they do bits, and they'll do like sets to work out new material. So when they do a big album, a new special, they've got all new material.
Right.
As opposed to recycling.
And it's a big thing when they do a special. I checked out their Bert Kreischer and Bill Burr. Thanks, Daniel. Mm-hmm. They have a podcast. I forget what it's called, but they sit in like a lawn chair and they talk to each other and smoke cigars or something like that.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love watching it. But they were talking to each other about like, how do you prepare for it? Do you watch it after you do it? The special, like it's almost like a championship game or something for sports. It's like that thing. It's a culmination.
Yeah.
And, what do you call it? It's like a crucible where everything has to be perfect because you take all your best jokes and do it then.
Have you ever seen Bumpin' Mics?
Bumpin' Mics, no.
It's on Netflix. It's with Dave Attell and Jeffrey Ross. They're both kind of insult comics. Yeah. And they're both up there at the same time. And Bumpin' Mics is when they like do a good burn. They'll like bump mics in the glasses. Okay. And they'll have stand up, but they also have video of them afterward. And some of the stuff is what they talk about is routines. And some comedians, they can't eat before they go on because they'll get nauseous. And Jeffrey Ross talks about, I eat all the time. I eat before I get up. I eat when I leave. And a lot of comedians don't eat before. And so afterward, they're just like starving because they hadn't eaten all night waiting for their set. And then they'll go eat. But then I think that's part of why comedians are good at podcasts is it's kind of like what they're doing at podcasts is what they kind of do after when they're done all their sets at night and they all go out to eat, they
do this social
or whatever. Yeah. And they talk about stuff, making jokes, laughing and stuff. And they're just kind of riffing just life, just like you would with close friends, having a beer at night, just laughing about things, talking about life,
Interesting. Yeah. It makes me think about like when I was in sports, after a game, we would in high school, well, this is actually in high school, but also mostly in middle school, we would always go to McDonald's afterwards. Okay. Win or lose, we'd go to McDonald's, be sweaty, we'd be in our things, and we'd be talking to each other about the game. It's just like a special feeling, like those French fries. Like I can't eat a McDonald's French fries now without thinking about a basketball game, Okay. So, well, you had a thought about that.
When I was in high school, I wrestled. Did I tell you this?
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, so I was in Pennsylvania when I went to high school, and a friend of mine, he was into wrestling. He's like, "Hey, man, you want to wrestle?" And I didn't do anything in high school. I went to school, went to class, and then I did VOTEC, but I didn't do any kind of sports or any kind of involved in anything. Okay. And he's like, "You want to wrestle?" I was like, "Yeah, you know what? I can do that." So, one thing people don't know, Pennsylvania is like a huge wrestling state.
Really?
They start wrestling the same time you play t-ball. So kids start at that age. And here I am, like sophomore in high school. I'm like, yeah, I could try it out, see what it's all about. And man, and so the great thing was in high school, the coach was, if anyone tried out for wrestling, you got the team. But if you wanted varsity, you've got to compete for varsity. Okay. He put anybody on JV and he just rotated in and out. And I didn't know anything. And people knew I didn't know anything. And I was so horrible. And when I do matches, my coach would just say, and he used to call me Joey. He's like, Joey, just don't get pinned. And then I was like, all right, I can do that. And they'd be like squishing your face. And they would have, like the cheerleaders sitting at the edge of the mat, like cheering, yeah, go. And I'm like, struggling just not to get pinned. And I was like, wrestling and everything. And it was the first scrimmage, and I was so nervous. And so scrimmage is not that. I don't know if you know how wrestling works, like the scoring and the points.
I have no idea.
So basically, you got weight classes, right?
Okay.
And at the time, I was really thin. I weighed 112, 114, 112, I think. Yeah. And that's a weight class. So anything 112 and below, you can be in there. And then the next one is like 125 and below, and they go all the way up. So I think there's like maybe 6 or 7 weight classes. So each weight class from each team comes out individually and they wrestle.
Okay.
And whatever they get in points goes back to the team. So even though it's individual, it's also team. No, so individually you're making points, but as a team, it's all collective. So it's a both team sport and individual.
That's cool.
And you take somebody down, it's a point. When you get out of a hold, it's a point. If you get pinned, that's points. So basically, he was like, just don't get pinned, because that's the most points you can get on an opponent is pin them. So I was just like trying not to pin. So anyways, so scrimmage is not like a match. Scrimmage is like they've got all these wrestlers wrestling at the same time. They have like 40 wrestlers wrestling at the same time, and you've got umpires, and they're all looking at the same time. And so they just had everyone in the weight class just circle up from different schools.
Okay.
And there was a female there, and I was like, oh my God, if I have to wrestle a female at my first wrestle and I lose, this will be like a huge blow to my ego. I was like, I can't do this. And I was starting because part of the wrestling is you've got to grab and hold, and you're holding somebody where you would never normally grab it. You might have to grab across their chest and pull them, grab under their leg and stuff. And I'd be like, like right here, like trying to get like little holds and stuff. And some people would do like the worst things. They'll do like a fish hook. They'll like grab you in your sphincter, and some people would not shower. Sometimes they wouldn't shower. They'd just be like stinky. I remember I had to wrestle with a couple guys, and I was like, I give up. Just pay me. I lose. I'm not good enough. There's a lot of things that are more in my life, and BO, some guy rubbing his armpit on my face is not one of those things that's important to me. Like, as long as you got your health, that's all that matters. Whatever you win. Anyways, so the umpire is just kind of pointing people out, and I was standing there, and my heart was racing because I was like, I cannot. Please don't let me wrestle this girl and lose in front of the whole thing. And so he points at the girl, and then he points my direction, and I was like, my heart was like racing, but it was the guy like right next to me. I remember
there was somebody further down the line than you.
He's from the same school. I think his name was Brett.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God. And out of the whole season, I only won one match. I won one match, and that was because the person didn't show up. So I go out there and they're like, he's like, yo, it's your turn. And I go out there and like, doing the wrestling stuff, because you got the headgear, looks just like, and then the guy raises her hand. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh. So I won. Yeah. It was the one and only time I won. It's the person.
That reminds me of, I just that's a funny story. It's hard to wrestle against girls. Like, you want them to be able to do their best. I got a couple girls. I want them, but it's like for a guy, it's like lose. If you lose to them, it's like you're gonna hear it from your coach. And if you win against them, then it's like you feel like you're just you're just oppressing them. I don't know. That's kind of a lose. But what you said about your only. I just recently downloaded Stratego on my phone because Mike Emmert, he
I thought I saw him say something on Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah. So I got it on Facebook.
Chess or something.
Yeah. I love Stratego. I've been playing since I was young. But anyways, I got the app, and like I'm going on there. I'm like, I've been playing a long time. I think I'm pretty good. And like the first one I lose, I'm like, oh man. And then it shows up. You get like an ELO. You get like a rating, a ranking. And so I'm like, man, I'm already one behind. And the next, so I'm like, I gotta play another one. The next one, the guy like quits out or something, and it gives me a win. I'm like, yes! Yes! I quit. That's it. Like, I'm 1-1.
You're better than half the people there.
Oh, well, let's go to the chat. So Dan wants to know about Jim Gaffigan. I think we're gonna go deeper on comedians a little later. Jim Gaffigan and Brian Regan. Well, so he says podcasts are great, but I feel that so much of jokes are in the visuals and the facial and the nonverbals. Like just watching you tell that story, like that's what I've always appreciated about your comedy. He said listening to an album is different than a video. What's your thoughts on a comics presentation? I've always thought that one of the strongest points of your comedy is your facial expressions and the things that like whoop, like all we've talked about. Like, I wonder if we need to add that to the quadrilateral. Like, it feels like maybe make it a quintilateral or something, but we need to add something about physical comedy. How we express comedy, because somebody, Mitch Hedberg is somebody who had zero affect, right? He had zero presentation, but his jokes people still herald him as one of the best comedians. So, but on the other side of the spectrum, you have somebody like Brian Regan, who like, his little slooped over like shtick has everything to do with his and Jim Gaffigan there's a lot to do with how you present it, your facial expression, your look. I heard one guy say he on Mad TV, he was a fat guy who was really funny, and he said he lost a lot of comedy cred when he got buff and skinny. And his comedy just wouldn't hit the same as when he was a fat guy.
Oh, interesting. Well, I think some of it has to do with, style, you know what I mean? And being able to kind of bring across that kind of cultural, remember how we were saying that you have to have a common cultural connection? So Mitch Hedberg can do that mentally by description, words, but sometimes just having physical acting it out, you begin, that is like, body language is able to convey that cultural thing where, say like you're in a shower and Spider, you're like, you know what I mean? So, like, oh, I know that feeling. And even though you may not have done that inside, you still have that like kind of feeling of being
the physicality of it.
Yeah. So, but that is one aspect. Maybe we should cover like the physicality of comedy.
Yeah. What do we say we're going to cover next time? I forget.
Oh yeah, we were gonna props.
Props.
Why certain props have certain, like the history of it. We'll look up some stuff where it started and stuff.
Yeah.
And
we're
then
gonna talk about that next time.
The other person will guess what it is. So
we do
like a pie in the face, or
right.
like a rubber chicken. Like we were talking the rubber chicken. Like, why is that funny?
Right. And that goes to the name Chickenfoot Podcast.
Yeah.
But and our intro now. But yeah, I think we do need to tackle we'll call it the fifth quadrant, or like the fifth dimension of the nonverbal, because as counselors, and actually Dan is a counselor as well, there's a lot of emphasis put on the nonverbal. I think, in school we hear a lot about, 75% of communication is nonverbal communication. So that has to be, as we talk about the psychological aspect of comedy, the nonverbal has to be a huge factor. And then you think about Mitch Hedberg and you're like, well, although he did have this kind of weird look about him.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if maybe instead of saying physical, maybe the physical could be a part of another overarching idea of being more, having a kind of like a presentation,
a presence,
yeah, presentation, some sort of like mood or ambiance that you're setting. Yeah. This is what and then you begin to have expectations of what this person is like, right? Yeah. So if you start out with somebody who's just Mitch Hedberg, and then all of a sudden he starts doing Carrot Top stuff, then you're like, it doesn't really fit. Right. Because the theme and the presentation or the mood has been set from the beginning. This is what he's like, and this is what the act is like, and this is so it's like if you go to a movie and it's a drama, but then there's comedy, and then it's also a scary movie. You're like, what is this? A scary movie? Is it a comedy? What is it?
Right. So consistency of someone's act and their presentation, because that's actually what Dan said, is like, your thoughts on the comics presentation. I think that is, like, if they have a real consistent presentation, they have like go-to phrases or sounds. Because I mean, when you think of Jim Gaffigan, I don't think he really likes me, that kind of thing, like that. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah. And that's kind of like a physical thing, because he's changing his voice and he does little body things. And
like you said, it's a presentation thing. Yeah. It's something you can't put on a slide share, but you can like make it part of your act. And that's what's interesting and unique about an act.
Yeah. And Dave Chappelle, like him, what he'll do is he'll be like, he's like leaning, like he's just kind of like at the bar or something. And then sometimes he'll laugh himself. He'll think something's funny, but then it kind of gives this sense of, and then he kind of does something where he feels like he's been just like social and he's just talking about something. You're like, well, where's he going? And then all of a sudden he's building all this up for a joke. And then after all these jokes, they have to deal with this thing, but he's building up this thing. So he's kind of talking, and then he has jokes that follow that. It's different. It's a different mood, theme, or I don't know the best word for that.
Yeah. The best word for that, I was looking at the comments, but the best word for that mood, theme, act. I think it's like their act.
I think that's part of the act.
And comics have to develop that. Shtick. That's their shtick. That's like that Jewish type word, shtick.
Sort of like Bobcat Goldthwait.
Huh?
Do you like in the 80s? He was like he was always yelling and acting like he was a crazy guy.
Oh yeah, from Revenge of the Nerds.
No, not Revenge of the Police Academy.
Police Academy.
Yeah. And he would act like he's crazy, and people thought he really was like that. Like that was a disorder.
I thought he was. He wasn't.
So they thought like that was some sort of disorder, and they're like. Yes. So, yeah.
Exactly. Dan Heiniger, this is what I was laughing at earlier. What's funnier than Jim Gaffigan's voice, Judas impersonation of his voice. The other day, people were saying that they thought I was like, I don't know, is it like some gathering? They're saying I reminded them of Jim Gaffigan, so I started doing the voice. I don't think you really should do that.
Oh yeah, this feels right. I do remember that from his one of his stand-up where one of his ex-girlfriends or something had the father was like a little person.
Oh.
And then he'd pick him up and he'd hold him and he's like, this feels right.
It's like his what is it? Narrator voice.
Yeah.
Narration voice.
Yeah. Or somebody who's kind of innocent or, unaware of what's going on. And they're just kind of.
He's doing the voice already. Well, we are to the stage in which we only have 10 minutes left. So want to leave it up to you. Do you have a funny story that you could tell us? I was supposed to remind you 1-800. I don't know what that has to do with anything.
This is a good story. This is not child appropriate.
Oh,
so if you're a child,
earmuffs.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, I was in seminary in Mississippi, and so I went to school full time, but I also worked at the Salvation Army in the evening full time. So at night, I did the night shift, and so it was like maybe before Katrina, because I was in Mississippi. It was before Katrina or after Katrina, I don't remember. But our boss wanted us to leave our numbers down near the desk. So if they need somebody to cover, they can get a hold of people because they had a problem with trying to get a hold of people. And that's when people started having flip phones and stuff like that. And so they wanted us to put 2 numbers down. Right. And all I had was a cell phone.
Okay. So, to your name.
To my name. That's all I had. 1 pair of pants and a cell phone. And so what I did is I was sitting there one night and I was looking at the sheet of paper because you had the counter, right? And you're sitting on a chair and you're at the front desk when people come in. You had the counter, and underneath the counter was the sheet of paper with everybody's names and phone numbers. So people come in, they couldn't see it, but when you're sitting at the desk, you could see it. Like the counter kind of covered it. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And so I had everybody's names and phone numbers and stuff. Everyone had 2 phone numbers. I only had 1. So it reminded me of this time where a friend of mine from high school, he gave me this 800 number to call. And it was like 1-800. And he's like, here, call this number. And he just wrote down the numbers and I dial it in and I call it up. And all I hear was, hey, this guy's voice like, hey man, you called 1-800 gay boys. And I was like, what the? And so I was like, what the? So I thought, wouldn't it be funny to do it again?
Oh,
at the Salvation Army. So I don't know what I was thinking. I have no idea what I was thinking. So I figured out the numbers for it, right? And so I put my cell phone number, and then I put the 800 and I just wrote out the numbers. And the whole time I was thinking, nobody's ever going to call it. You know what I mean? And every time I would see it, I would just laugh to myself. I'm like, ha, ha, ha. Wouldn't it be funny if somebody called it? Right? I just laughed to myself.
Oh, no.
So fast forward like a year or something goes by. And I come into work and my boss, Rob Polkai, was laughing. Him and another coworker were just laughing and laughing. I was like, hey man, what's going on? He's like, man, he just started laughing. He said, I've been calling all these people trying to get a hold of people. I couldn't get a hold of you, so I called your second number. And I was like, oh. And he just started laughing. He's like, he picked up and he's like, what the heck? This can't be right. And they're like redialing it. It's like, this is not the right number. And so they're like calling this number over and over again.
Oh, mercy.
Like, hey, Are you lonely?
Oh man, you crazy cat. Wow. I mean, it'd been even more funny if it was like an emergency. Like if you were like on the ground, like passed out, they're like, we gotta call somebody.
Yeah.
They gotta call this number. Hey, you lonely?
Yeah. You looking for a good time tonight? No, this is an emergency. We need 911.
Oh man. All right. Well, hopefully those of you tuned in were able to get a little laugh, were able to think a little deeper about comedy. This is what are we supposed to say at the end? I forget.
32 Skidoo.
Oh yeah, okay.
You know what? That's like an old comedy line.
Right.
And when we do let's do the next time.
Okay.
I
won't ask next time. I'll just leave it to you.
3 or 4 like old props or old comedian things that used to be funny and why they're not funny, or how did they become funny? What was like the origin story of it? You know,
don't forget these major props: smashing of the pumpkin or the watermelon.
My sister met Gallagher.
Really?
Yeah. So he was doing a show in Hagerstown, Maryland, and my sister worked at that location as a restaurant,
the venue,
a waiter. And she was coming out, and she was parked in his parking spot. And so he was giving her a hard time. He's just like, "Oh, this is my parking spot. You don't even look like me." And she was just laughing and laughing. And so
that's funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, until next time, everybody, thanks for joining us. My name is, let me get rid of this. My name is Judah Buddha, and I'm here with
Arthur Spooner and 32 Skidoo.
Zapazoo. Oh, I gotta press the button right.